On this week's Vaticano, Pope Francis visits Rome's North American College for the first time since St. John Paul II did so in 1980. Throughout the Eternal City, experts speak of Blessed Junipero Serra and defend his legacy against modern misrepresentations. The Queen of Sweden meets the Pope and joins him in his fight against human trafficking. And the Order of Malta gathers in a monastery in Germany. And a new app that brings the Bible to your smartphone. Now on Vaticano.
Pope Francis was welcomed to the North American College last weekend. Seminarians and priests, as well as bishops and cardinals from the U.S., Canada, and Australia, celebrated Mass with him. The pontiff was marking a day of reflection for the soon-to-be canonized Franciscan missionary Junipero Serra. In his homily, he called the Holy Spirit to come down to the Americas.
Fiduciosi nella promessa fatta da Gesù.
We have to trust the promise of Jesus, which we have listened to in the Gospel. We have to ask God for this particular gift of the Holy Spirit. Let us ask the risen Jesus, Lord of history, that life on the American continent roots itself always deeper in the Gospel which it has received, that Christ be ever more present in the life of the members of the families, of the peoples, and of the nations, not through force, but through the greater glory of God.
E non per potere, per la maggiore gloria di Dio.
Pope Francis received a relic of the lauded friar in the chapel of the college, a tangible reminder of the Blessed's example.
Well, I think that obviously the Church and the Holy Father want us to emulate his zeal, his heroic virtue in giving of himself for the work of evangelization. And that's what he'd like us to do as seminarians and priests. So that's the example I think Junipero Serra gives to our men, a spending of themselves, the giving up of their own desires, wants, comfort, for the work of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And Junipero Serra did that. It's obviously a great joy for us to have Pope Francis visit the North American College. We haven't had a pope come to the college since St. John Paul II came, right after his election. So it's been over 35 years since a pope's come to the college for a visit. So to have the successor of Peter, obviously, to whom our men have such great devotion.
At the end of the visit, the Pope laid flowers at the feet of an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe, patroness of the Americas. The Pope left the college after the Mass, but his impression on the seminarians will remain. The last week was dominated by events on the saintly Franciscan friar of the 18th century, Blessed Junipero Serra. Research about the future saint seems to give divergent images of who he was. These scholars, historians, and archaeologists came to Rome to set the record straight.
We're grateful that he has chosen to canonize Blessed Junipero Serra in the United States. And so this is also a significant step. And I loved what Archbishop Gomez said about a working class missionary. I think we're calling forth, that very thing within the church in the United States. Let's take a step back. Let's look transparently at all things that have happened. Let's look at the context in which Father Serra worked and contributed to the life.
Archaeologist Ruben Mendoza, who is of Yaqui Indian and Mexican-American heritage, at first learned hatred for Serra until he dived deeper into his life. Now he is an adamant defender of the saint's work.
Junipero Serra has been a voice for Native Americans, and by virtue of his death, this canonization process will basically permit Native Americans to voice their issues, concerns about the entirety of the colonial period, but at the same time, those who come to know him by virtue of new dialogues will come to realize that he was there for them. The introduction of stock raising, agriculture, a host of many dimensions of what is today the California political economy is due to Junipero Serra and those friars who zealously brought these elements of tradition into California, along with the evangelical effort.
There has been the attempt to misrepresent the missions and the saints, culminating in the Californian government wanting to take down a statue of the saint from the National Statuary Hall.
The Pontiff, Pope Francis, has announced the canonization of Serra and the California State Legislature has voted to essentially remove the statue of that very individual who Pope Francis has determined to canonize. To me, that is mal cultura. That is in very poor taste, and it is much like the kinds of erasures of history that are going on in Iraq, where ancient Nimrud and some of the oldest cities on the planet are being pillaged and destroyed for profit and politics. And in my opinion, the California State Legislature has committed a horrendous crime in that regard.
This removal has triggered protests from all sides.
I suspect the opposition to the removal of Serra is based on a lack of appreciation for what the missions did to California, did for California.
When California was taken over in 1850 by the American government, they set upon a path of destroying the so-called wild Indians of California. In fact, there were bounties paid by the first governor of California. He put out $1.5 million for the scalps of Native Americans at $5 a head. And this, in effect, decimated the population. Unfortunately, there are those who believe that scourge, that Holocaust, defines the mission period, and in fact, it does not.
Pope Francis will canonize Blessed Junipero Serra on September 23rd, during his apostolic journey to the United States. Pope Francis opened the Expo 2015 in Milan by sending a video message. He recalled the culture of waste and that food should be better distributed.
The paradox
of abundance, an expression of John Paul II during his address to the FAO, persists still, despite the attempts of bringing forth good effects. Also, this Expo in certain aspects takes part in this paradox of abundancy. If it obeys the culture of waste, of dispersion, and does not contribute to a model of sustained and balanced development. Therefore, let this Expo be an occasion for a change of mentality, that we stop thinking that our daily actions, at every level of responsibility, do not have an impact on the lives of those close and far who suffer of hunger.
Visiting the Food and Agriculture Organization in November 2014, he repeated the same idea, that a culture of waste is hurting a sustainable culture of food. Pope Francis focused on the marriage as a sacrament in the Church during his general audience on Wednesday.
Marriage is a great mystery that has the dignity to reflect the love of Christ to His Church. All Christians are called to love as Christ loved us, but the husband, Paul says, is to love his wife as his own body, as Christ loves the Church. This evangelical radicalism restores the reciprocity of the original creation. The sacrament of marriage is an act of faith and love, in which the spouses, by their own free will, fulfill their vocation, surrendering without reserve and without measure. The Church is fully involved in every Christian marriage. It is built with its achievements and suffers its failures. We must seriously take the responsibility that follows from this indissoluble bond. The decision to marry in the Lord also has a missionary aspect, requiring that spouses be willing to be transmitters of the blessing and of the graces of God to all.
Welcome back. This is Vaticano.
Pope Francis prayed the Regina Coeli from the window of the Apostolic Palace, calling the faithful to let Christ, the only true vine, work through them.
Each one of us is a branch of the one vine, and all together we are called to bring the fruits of this common belonging to Christ and to the Church. Let us entrust ourselves to the intercession of the Virgin Mary, so that we may become living branches in the Church and give witness to our faith in a coherent way, a coherence of life and thought, of life and faith, aware that all of us, according to our particular vocation, participates in the unique salvific mission of the Lord Jesus Christ.
All'unica missione salvifica di Cristo.
Pope Francis visited a parish in the vicinity of Rome, Santa Maria Queen of Peace in Ostia, the port of ancient Rome. The Pope traveled there to celebrate an afternoon Mass.
Rimanere in Gesù vuol dire
To remain in Jesus means to have the will to receive life from Him and forgiveness, but also pruning, but always from Him. Remaining in Jesus means to seek Jesus. To pray, it means prayer. Remaining in Jesus means to approach the sacraments, the Eucharist and reconciliation. Remaining in Jesus, and this is the hardest thing, means to do what Christ has done, to have the same attitude as Jesus.
avere lo stesso atteggiamento di Gesù.
There have been more than 200 baptisms in the parish in the last year. Pope Francis made an unscheduled visit during the afternoon trip. He stopped in to see the Sisters of Charles de Foucault, who live in the Luna Park, a trailer park outside of Rome. He was greeted by overwhelming joy and was literally hugged and kissed by the bystanders and inhabitants of the park. Pope Francis thanked the sisters for their work and said in a joking tone that also he was old and weak, but not yet too much, and asked for their prayers. Pope Francis wants to make the poorest the protagonists. Now, Pope Francis sent a video message to the Catholic charity called Caritas, where poor people were invited to act out a theater play written for them about their experiences.
Tonight, it is you who make the stage, and therefore create a space to transmit precious teachings of love, of the need of the other, of solidarity, and of how, in difficulty, the love of the Father can be discovered.
Just weeks ago, the Vatican organized a guided visit for homeless people to the Sistine Chapel and the Vatican museums. In mid-May, the Vatican will host a charity concert for the poor where they will take the front row seats, those usually reserved for diplomats. At the end of April, Cardinal Giovanni Canestri died in Rome with 96 years of age. He served as Bishop of Genoa in northern Italy from 1987 to 1995. His funeral was held in the Vatican. The United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon met with Pope Francis in the Vatican at the end of April before going on to address a conference exploring the moral issues connected to climate change.
This morning, I met His Holiness Pope Francis, and we discussed the various issues of this world, including particularly the climate change and sustainable development and migration. And there are many issues, but I'm ready to answer your questions.
The one-day international symposium was organized by the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and deals with the Christian imperative of stewardship of creation and vision of the announced encyclical of Pope Francis.
I told His Holiness that I'm looking forward to his encyclical as soon as possible. I was told that it may be issued sometime in June, but I'm not aware what it will contain. It's not my responsibility. It's in the hands of His Holiness, but I am very much encouraged that His Holiness is very much committed, and he assured me that he will work with the United Nations and world leaders, scientists, and faith leaders to help this realized for humanity. And about this responsibility, who needs to address this one?
Science and morality seem to cross regarding this problem.
I don't think religious leaders, faith leaders should be scientists. I'm not a scientist either. But what is clear, what is important is their moral commitment for political leaders, their political will. That is important.
At the same time, scientists met right outside the Vatican to talk about the same topic. The conference was organized by the Heartland Institute, a group that is very critical of the narrative of the human influence on climate change. They are trying to direct attention to the fact that this term could be linked with other issues in a misleading way.
I do think they've been instrumentalized, and I say that because I have seen that they're now using climate change and global warming as with a nexus and a connection with human trafficking. And when you see false science and false crises used to be bolstered by real crises, then you can start to recognize that there is something else going on. Overpopulation is in fact one of the canards that is used to push the abortion agenda and sterilization and reproductive family services that are being pushed by the UN.
This retired NASA scientist suggests that a different way of inquiry is needed, one that is based on physics. He hopes for the Pope to have a more balanced input.
We agree with the United Nations that the small amount of warming in their uncertainty band is realistic. The high warming that they predict comes from computer simulation models, not data. And at NASA, if your model is not validated, if it does not agree with physical data or experiment, you ignore it. But climate scientists don't ignore their model output. They treat it like it's just as valid as physical data. I think because it's been raised as a world alarm that the Pope should look into it. But I am concerned that his timetable for writing an encyclical and who I see that the Pope is talking to, that he may not have a chance to really look at the broader field of engineering and science that says there's not a problem. I would pray that the Pope would have discernment in looking at this problem and that he would listen to all scientists, not just the United Nations.
As in the past, Pope Francis opens the field for discussion. The encyclical is scheduled to be released this summer.
Pope Francis met Queen Silvia of Sweden at the end of April. She came to Rome leading a delegation to a one-day seminar in the Vatican on human trafficking and the exploitation of women.
The problem of trafficking is really awful, and it's really increasing, and there's so many, the figures are so enormous, 1.2 million children as far as we know. So that's really very difficult. And I must say, one should talk more about children's rights. Many people don't think about it, that children also have rights. So I think that's something which we should take it for very, very seriously.
The two conversed in Spanish, which the Queen speaks fluently. The Queen spoke with the Holy Father about various activities she has promoted in Sweden, especially in favor of children and victims of human trafficking.
He's a special man and very warm, and he started thanking Sweden for everything Sweden is doing since many, many years back. Also for people from Argentina who were refugees. They were accepted in Sweden. They found a new life in Sweden, and also from Chile. And then they had the possibility to go back as well. And now all the refugees that we have in Sweden.
She was accompanied by her youngest daughter, Princess Madeleine of Sweden, her husband, Christopher O'Neill, and their young daughter, 14-month-old Princess Leonore. The Pope very much enjoyed the presence of the toddler. Pope Francis gave the Queen a pontifical medal along with a copy of Evangelii Gaudium in the Queen's native German.
Welcome back. This is Vaticano.
There are about 15,000 members, true members of the order, women and men spread throughout the world. And in addition to this, there are about 100,000 volunteers worldwide in many different countries, not even all of them Catholic, but just involved in many, many ways in the charitable activities of the order.
Das ist also nicht nur eine Organisation, die eben jetzt karitativ ist, sondern eben darüber
We are not only a charitable organization because of our religious charism, religious unity, and religious vows. We are true followers of Christ because we care for the poor and people in need from a religious perspective.
Aber vom religiösen Seite eben hier helfen können.
We have at least once a year a spiritual retreat, 1 or 2 days in different parts of Switzerland. But here in Einsiedeln we find that the atmosphere of peace, of spirituality is really helping us to bind together and to be, as much as we can, at least for a couple of days, a community.
Ich versuche immer sehr existenziell zu sprechen, so dass es dem einzelnen Ordensmitglied eine Hilfe wird, wie sein
I always try to speak in an existential way so that it helps the individual members of the order to practice their Christian faith in their everyday life.
Beispiele von Heiligen, die Lehre der Kirche, die Lehre von
During the retreat, I offer suggestions, inspiration, and help through examples from saints, the teachings of the Church, the teachings of mystics, the experience of great Christians. The Catholic Church has many of those treasures to offer. I draw from them, discover them, and try to help the individual to become a strong disciple, to be on fire for Jesus, and by their conviction and witness, to bring Jesus to others.
die dann Jesus zu den Menschen kommt.
Bible and the smartphone, not an anachronism, reality, in a new app.
American Bible Society 2 years ago commissioned the building of an application for youth, and the purpose of this application is to engage young people with the Bible. This app novelty is that it is a game. It is a game that is interactive. It's a game that involves others while you are playing, that you could create a community of players, and it's a game that allows you to have conversation and discussion, and at the same time build the Bible. Why we call it Build the Bible is that the game allows you to buy book by book of the Bible. And in that sense, you could certainly cover all the books of the Bible.
The app seeks to help people discover the Bible while enjoying it.
The reason behind this game is the loss of biblical culture in today's society. Our youth, in our research, 40% at least, had never opened the Bible, never read the Bible, have no interest in the Bible. They consider that the Bible is irrelevant in their life. And so a way of reversing this trend, it is the creation of this application.
The app is available for smartphones of any kind and can be downloaded for free.